I'm a 20-year-old, short, petite female working at Subway, and I can't help but be nice to anyone, even if they creep me out. I feel bad, usually. About a year ago, we had this guy around 35 to 40 years old who would come in every day for lunch. He was fascinated by my stretched ears and the few piercings I had on my face, and always asked questions. He would sit down after I rang him out and watch me from his table for 2 hours non-stop, just staring at me while I helped other customers. This goes on for about 2 weeks. Every day he would ask for my number, saying he had plugs and tunnels he wanted to give me, and see me wearing them in my ears, and I always politely declined. One day I was alone in the store because my manager had to run to the bank. We were really slow that day, so I was just in the back room messing around on my phone. I heard the door chime, looked up, and yet no one was there. Then I saw the man walk past the front of the store really quickly, like he was in a hurry. The store phone rings. I said, "Thanks for calling Subway. How can I help you?" Then the person answered, asking if I was the girl with the nice ears. I found that weird. I responded with a yes and asked who was calling. Then he asked weird questions. "Are you alone in the back room right now? Are you working by yourself?" At this point, I really got creeped out and knew it was him. I hung up and texted my manager about the situation so she would hurry back. He called again, this time asking me more weird questions. For example, he asked what I would do with him in a room with the door locked. Did I have a boyfriend? Why was I playing hard to get? I was very nervous, but nothing happened, fortunately. My manager gets back and I tell her everything. In the middle of the lunch rush, he calls again. This time, my manager answered, and to this day, she never told me what he said. However, the look on her face made my spine shiver. She told him if he called again or showed up here, she would call the police. I thought that was the end of it, but alas, I was wrong. About a week later, I'm clocking out and getting ready to walk to my car parked in the front. When I looked outside, I saw him standing by my car and looking inside it. I was an idiot and left the back door unlocked. I watched him crawl inside and shut the door. The creep was trying to hide in my back seat and do God knows what to me when I got in. My manager locked the front door of our store and called the police. When they arrived, they had to pretty much drag him out of my car, and he was arrested. On him were a butcher knife, rope, and a rag with chloroform on it. If I hadn't looked up when I did, I would probably be dead right now. My friend was over and had to make a run to Walmart. It was about 9 p.m., not too late, but a time my mother normally wouldn't let me out and about at. But given that I was graduated, my mum let us go. I was 18 and my friend was 19 at the time. A quick plan to get garbage bags, something that should have taken 5 minutes top, ended up taking half an hour. We got in, got the garbage bags, and walked around for a bit. We just kind of fooled around, browsing and talking, whatever. During this time, I noticed that my friend was acting kind of weird, but brushed it off. We were standing in line, ready to check out. My friend leaned in close and said, "Do you see that guy?" I glanced up, but didn't know what she was talking about. I still feel really guilty about this, for being too dumb to notice. We started walking away after checking out. Buying only garbage bags doesn't take a lot of time. As we were leaving, she started to explain. There was some dude that said, "Hello," and being polite, she said hi back. We then saw him at checkout. Both of us being paranoid naturally, we brushed it off. We got in the car and we saw him in the parking lot. Again, no big deal. Deciding to play it safe, we decided to wait until he left. Turns out he had a couple of guys with him. They pulled over on our left, leering at us through the car windows. It was nearly dead silent in the car, but I could swear you could hear our hearts frantically beating. Even typing this up, I still get that panic. The car of guys quickly sped over, parking next to us. My friend immediately floored the car, pulling in reverse and speeding out of the parking lot. The guys followed. We quickly sped out of there, making a turn on some random road, the car of guys behind us at all times, going as fast as we were. We honestly thought we were going to die. At one point, they ended up passing us and waving before pulling into a church parking lot ahead and turning around to get behind us again. At this point, we're still going 80 in a 35 and getting closer to my house. Neither of us wanted to lead the guys to our homes, so we thought fast. Near my house, there's a little store where you can buy cigarettes, alcohol, candy. Pretty much a gas station without any gas pumps. We hauled ass to the back of the store, parking and moving to head in through the back. One of the workers was outside in the back and approached us. Luckily, the guy understood exactly and started to go up front. We peeked around the corner, and lo and behold, the group of guys were there around front. My friend and I proceeded to sneak in through the back. Now, in the back on the left side is a deli station, and the right side is where the alcohol is. My friend ducked into the deli station, and I hid out on the right side. There was a female worker in the deli, and then my friend made a signal for her to be quiet. The female worker pretended we weren't there at all. A couple minutes pass, and we hear the front door open. I peek around the corner, and it's one of the guys. I hide out in back, heart racing, hoping he doesn't come back here. Finally, a few more minutes pass, and the guy worker from before comes in through the back and tells us that the guys are gone. He chewed them out. Oddly enough, they flat out admitted to stalking us. When the guy worker pretended to be family, they quickly backed off, claiming they were only getting beer. We learned from the female worker that those guys are regulars and are always going on about creepy and sexist crap in Spanish, thinking she doesn't know. My friend and I end up hanging out for a little bit, just to make sure the guys weren't hanging around on a street corner. We're totally grateful to the guy and girl working there, because they were in complete understanding and worried about us. A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mom. On my way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. He greeted me cheerfully and said, "My name is Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept right on chattering. He said a lot of things and asked a ton of questions. Here are some that I could remember. Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you? Of course, you're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you? That's okay, though. They can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? If that's not enough, he continued, being creepier. You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office. Do you like suckers? Thankfully, we were nearing my house. I ran forward, up the back steps, and through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long and very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive by nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mum, who said maybe it was on his way home from work. But then the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home and if I talked to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure and whether I could be forgetting something. I told him no again, and my dad frowned. Then how does he know your name? He asked. It turns out that was not all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister nor I were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then, one night, one of my brothers told us that he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me and my sister. Things got complicated after that. My father had called the police, but there was not a lot they could do. This time was before there were any anti-stalking laws. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. Dad then called a friend of his from back in the day who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came screeching to a halt. I couldn't walk to school alone, and I couldn't play outside. I couldn't even walk to the nearby Super America. That's sort of like a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. Then one afternoon, my sister, 2 of my brothers, my mum and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple of weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German shepherd, born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was Ramsey and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself. He said the window in the kitchen could easily be opened with a knife from the outside, even when it was locked. He also mentioned the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch, and how the lock could be finagled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night, my dad put in some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. One time, my parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. Also, my older brothers were at Saints West roller skating rink. I remember my sister was on the phone with her best friend, and my little brother was on the floor asleep. I remember it was late at night, and I was watching Devo on the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. Suddenly, the top of the French doors swung inward, and in the few milliseconds, before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television, and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and didn't turn on the light. This way, we could see outside somehow. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hall to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked loudly. My sister asked out the window what the man wanted. He stepped back and said it was pizza delivery and asked us to open the door. She scoffed at him, declaring she was not stupid. She could see he didn't have a pizza, and she was calling the cops. The man left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what happened, and they walked around the yard, watching for him. They came back in, and things settled down. By now, we had pretty much given up calling the cops because it never helped. We just went back in, each of us carrying a knife from the kitchen just in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen, through the doorway into the dining room and at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could still feel eyes on him, so he went closer to the door to try to see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the door windows, so he still couldn't see. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door. Then he cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see. There on the other side of the window pane was Dr. Ramsey, smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but didn't find him. A couple of weeks later, I was at school and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name, and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told all about him, and she took me inside right away and called my mum. That same day, my mum had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he'd called to say he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night, thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink, and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table was his gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. Maybe he was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to us while he was gone. I sat with him for a time, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events, and many more, took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He had vanished from our lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, and everything else were gone. For a long time, during and after the Dr. Ramsay days, I would have a recurring nightmare in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, or in a coma. Sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. When I was about 19, I met this guy who worked at the subway near where I worked. He was a nice enough guy, and he took me out on a date. Everything started off really well, but about a week into it, he started asking me for money. It started off small at first, like for a soda or $5 for gas. Then he started asking for larger amounts, like a few hundred to get him by for a week or so. I never gave it to him, but he started wanting to move in together within about 2 weeks of dating. When we would go out places, he started to do very weird things. He would start screaming in public or singing nonsense at the top of his lungs. He would always play around afterward that he was just having fun, but it was weird and embarrassing to be seen with him. Also, my dog, who loves everyone, would not let him near me. I've never seen that dog so much as growl at another person, but he would try and bite the hell out of him when he came close to me. By the end of the second week, I broke up with him over the phone. I normally didn't do that, but at the time his erratic behavior made me nervous. He completely flipped out. He started showing up where I worked to the point where my manager had to ban him from the building, and co-workers walked me to my car. He would show up literally everywhere I was, even to the grocery store or the gas station. I started getting text messages and weird email about how we were meant to be and how he couldn't live without me and such. Then one day, he showed up in the middle of the night and told me to come outside. I told him to leave, or I was going to the cops. He literally started sobbing to the point where he was almost hyperventilating. I went back inside and locked the house up. The next day, I was home alone and just doing some work as I was in college at the time. That's when I heard some rustling by the front door. I thought it was just the dog messing around or the mailman or something, but the dog started barking and growling. The doorbell began to ring. I didn't think much of it, probably just a solicitor. Then someone started messing with the door handle. I grabbed a broom of all things because that was all I had, and I heard someone open the door. My dog tried to bite him, and I locked myself in my bathroom and started screaming that I called the police. He up and ran away. I called my neighbor who lived across the street from me and was former military. He checked out the house and made sure he was gone. My dog had a few scrapes and cuts on him, but he was okay. I then filed for a restraining order the next day, and my dad took the liberty of calling his father and explaining what happened. I received a few other emails him following that, but he never came to my house again. Luckily, I've moved a few hours away and I'm married now, but it was still very frightening at the time, considering all these happened within just 3 weeks. My stalker ex leaked pictures of me in my underwear, but that scarily is not the craziest thing he did to me. One time I was home alone, and I used to rarely lock the door, since I lived with my mother at the time. I went for a shower, completely unaware that I was in danger. I finished with my shower when I noticed a presence. Someone was under my bed. I knew that I didn't have time to run to the bathroom. I picked up the phone and called the police, and luckily, the operator understood that I wasn't pranking her. I acted like I'm calling my mom, so he wouldn't know I'm calling the police and do something crazy. I said, "Mom, are you close? I might need you to pick something up." The police officer replied, "Ma'am, you have contacted the wrong person." My heart was racing, and I tried not to look at my bed. I continued pretending to talk to my mother, asked whether she was nearby, and said that I needed help with something. The operator understood. "Ma'am, are you unable to talk but need help? Can you tell me your address?" the operator asked. Then I answered, "Thanks, Mum. You need to put your name and our home address on the envelope." The operator got the details and reassured me that they will send help immediately. The second I put down the phone, my ex got from under the bed. I tried to not show him I was scared of him. He said, "We need to talk. Look, I don't want to disturb you, but did you get my letter?" I answered, "Yes, I need some time to think about it. Would you like some tea?" I forced a smile and willed the police to come quicker in my head. Sure enough, someone knocked on my door moments later. I rushed to the door, and when I opened it, I couldn't stop my tears and barely stopped myself from hugging the police officers. I explained to them the situation while my ex claimed I was lying. They searched him and found a knife concealed in his pocket and a Beretta, so they charged him with carrying a weapon he didn't have a license for and trespassing. He did some time in state prison, and now I have a restraining order against him. I never go to sleep before I check under the bed and make sure every door is locked. This incident happened when I was around 16 years old. My aunt was in town, and we were on our way back from the grocery store to my mom's place. To provide some context, my parents are divorced, and my mom lives in a rural area about a 10-minute drive from anywhere. As we pulled into our driveway, a black car followed us. My aunt and I stayed in our vehicle, and a man exited the black car and approached our driver's side door. I can't quite put my finger on it, but he gave off a creepy vibe. Pasty skin, intense staring eyes, and just an overall strange demeanor. He claimed to be lost, looking for directions to a fitness center in the next town over. It's the same fitness center a minute away from the grocery store. It struck us as odd, but I gave him directions. Despite thanking me, he continued to stare and asked if we knew each other, to which we replied, no. He provided his name, but I emphasized that we had no connection. After some awkward moments, he asked for my name. Feeling uneasy, I made the mistake of telling him. He confirmed that we didn't know each other, returned to his car, and we watched him drive off. My aunt and I agreed he was peculiar, but we brushed it off and started taking the groceries inside. To reach the back door where we had parked, taking a long, winding path behind the house was necessary. While my aunt went out to grab the remaining groceries, I settled on the living room couch and glanced outside. The black car was still in the driveway. My aunt came upstairs, explaining that the guy was almost at our door, claiming he forgot the direction she'd given him. It was just right, left, and right. Simple directions following the main roads. We were both spooked, but fortunately, we never saw him again. A month later, I was at my dad's place. I posted something on Facebook about being bored. From this, I learned an important lesson to always set your page to private. Within minutes, I got a message from the same guy, asking if he could come over. Home alone and rightfully terrified, I immediately blocked him and informed my dad. He reached out to one of his cop friends, discovering that the guy had been expelled from a local university for stalking. He had 2 other stalking counts and a restraining order against him. Another month passed, and during study hall, a friend shared a story about a guy stalking his older sister. The shocking part was that this stalker had almost forced my friend's sister off the road in an attempt to make her pull over. When she did, the stalker approached her vehicle, but my friend wisely drove away. It didn't take me long to connect the dots. The stalker in my friend's story and the creepy guy I encountered were the same person. Fast forward 6 months, news articles confirmed his arrest for attempting to kidnap 3 different women within an hour. He failed in all attempts, but he nearly ran over the last woman's father who was with her at the time. The entire experience left me profoundly disturbed. This happened to me during my first year of university. It was October. I was living in the dorms, and I need to give you a brief rundown of the dorms. You need a key card to gain access to your specific floor, so even though someone on the 3rd floor and 4th floor live in the same building, they can't access each other's floors. I had injured myself playing sports, so I was under orders to rest, which meant no Halloween parties for me. It was pretty sad for a horror fiend like myself, but to try and make the time a happy one, I busied myself helping to make costumes for people and doing their makeup. Once I was finally finished, I packed up my makeup and decided to watch some movies in my room. A guy popped up and introduced himself. We chatted a bit and exchanged email addresses, and I walked back to my room and said goodnight. The first warning sign was that he walked into my room behind me, despite me saying I was going to walk into my room. I felt really awkward and tried to say, in a roundabout way, that he needed to leave, but he wasn't getting the hint. I finally had to say directly that he needed to leave my room now. I chalked this up to him, maybe being drunk or something, but I did wonder how he got onto my floor if he wasn't with anyone partying. Before I went to bed that night, I checked my email, and there were 5 from Mr. Creep. The first being, "Hey, I'm so glad we're friends," and the rest asking why I wasn't online. A few days later, I got a knock on my door when I was studying, and it was him. I explained that I was studying and needed privacy. He tried to walk into my room again, but I braced my arm on the frame and said firmly that I needed to study. The next day, he was at my door again, and then again at the next. I began pretending that I was not home. Another day there was a knock at the door, and when I checked the peephole, there was no one there, and I assumed the postman had come. I opened the door, and lo and behold, it was the creepy guy. He has begun hiding from the peephole, so I would be more likely to answer the door. I told my roommate never to open the door if he was there, and I told the people living on my floor that this guy was beginning to creep me out. So if he wanted to get on the floor, whatever sob story he gave them, don't let him on. A few days after that, I was on the bus coming home, and I got a text from someone who lived on my floor. They told me not to come home because Mr. Creep was on my floor and was sitting in front of my door, just waiting. I went to a friend's house and spent the night, and when I got home, I was told he waited for 4 hours before leaving. At this point, I was getting freaked out. A few days after that, he began waiting outside the building, and if I left, he would follow me wherever I went. I was too spineless to tell him to go away, and I tried to be more passive about it. I never spoke and never gave any indication I was paying attention, but he followed me to class and the cafeteria and always tried to follow me home and get access to the floor. I went to the resident advisor, who's an older student who sort of watches over the floor, and told her what happened. She spoke to the RA for his floor and was told that Creep had been telling his own RA that we were best friends and dating. My RA tried to explain that I was uncomfortable, but the other RA believed him, and that was that. Thankfully, one thing did deter him. He would never approach me if I was with a group of people, so my floor mates banded together. If I went to dinner, I went with my floor, and if I wanted a drink or seconds, someone had to come with me. Walking to class and even waiting for the bus was done in a group. He got onto my floor once when someone else was coming home, and he forced his foot in the door to let himself in. I was hidden in another room. When he left my door to go and sit in the television lounge to wait for me, I went downstairs and ran around to the other side of the building and got into my room before he noticed. Then the phone calls began. I never gave him my number, but he somehow obtained my mobile and room phone. At first, it would be 1 to 2 phone calls a day until I told him I wanted him to leave me alone. Then, the calls began coming in every hour, with him begging and pleading for me to talk to him. Without caller ID, I needed to answer the phone because of school and my part-time job. At this point, it was November, and I was a wreck. I was tired of having to plan out doing simple things like going for food or walking to a bus stop. Stress wasn't helping me recover from my injury, and I was losing weight, and I just looked sickly. I went back to the RA and begged her to help me. She went to the head of the dorms and explained everything that happened. I explained how far this had gone, and my roommate told them that he had followed her a few times, demanding that she tell him where I was. I felt awful. She never told me this because she was afraid of upsetting me further, and I felt really terrible for putting her through this garbage. I don't know what went on behind closed doors. From what I guess, he was told to leave me alone, and any further contact would result in him being kicked out of the dorms, There was one email where he went insane on me, telling me how awful I was and demanding how I could do this to him. He's delusional. He said we were so happy together and that I was definitely cheating on him with other men. After that, there was nothing. At first, when I'd see him around campus, I would run to the women's toilets to hide. I'd see him around town or on campus, and he'd always just stare at me. He never tried to approach me, never tried to get my attention. He was just staring. I used to walk by and try to pretend I didn't notice him staring, and I'd try and act like my heart wasn't pounding. For a bit of context, I'm a 22-year-old female, 5'2", and about 125 pounds. My mother is 45, 5'0", and would blow over in the wind. We both look much younger than our actual ages, and due to that and small statures, have had our fair share of run-ins with creeps. I tend to carry a small arsenal on me at all times because of this. I have pepper spray, a taser, a pocket knife, and a small dagger inside my purse, so I tend to be pretty confident I can handle myself. Please don't judge. We live in a big city, and I'm a small girl. This particular night was the worst we've experienced with creepers so far, however. My mother and I were grocery shopping at our usual Walmart. It was later in the day, around 7 p.m., something we try to avoid because, as said before, we've had our fair share of run-ins with the creepers. We just pulled into the parking lot and began our trek inside when I spotted 5 young men, older than myself but still young, standing outside the store, laughing and smoking near the front door. I pay it no mind when they glance at me and my mum, and we walk inside to the carts. The men all head inside now, and again I shrug it off but keep a mental note of their faces. I tend to be on the paranoid side. We head inside, and as we shop, I keep noticing 2 or 3 of the 5 men are in each aisle we go to. Alarm bells start to go off, but I push the paranoia aside and just keep my head high as we walk. Most of the time, confidence puts the creepers off. I make sure to go down a few random aisles just to test it, and sure enough, at least one of them is always there. Well, my mum starts to notice as well the more aisles we go down, and her hand squeezes mine in warning as she shoots one of the men a death glare when we stop in the cereal aisle. She tended to still be a mama bear, despite that I'm a grown woman. The guy, who's now moved about 2 feet from our cart, just glances over and smirks at her. He's tall, lanky, with short, dark hair partly hidden under a ball cap and a pointed, rat-like face. Mum just narrows her eyes, unnerved at his response to her look, and shoots me an unsure glance. I shrug, shooting a look his way before moving around him to grab a box off the shelf a little ways away. The hair on the back of my neck prickles suddenly, and as I turn around quickly, I jump when I see another one of the guys. This one is blonde, shaggy, oily hair hanging to his chin, with his hands tucked in a grey, reflective material Punisher hoodie. He's staring up at the boxes, but a smirk is on his face as he directly stands in my path. My stomach flips, and I grit my teeth as I snap, "Excuse me." I try to go around him, but he just moves in my path. A glare is shot at him now, not finding his antics funny, and Mom, seeming to notice, comes to my rescue by pushing the cart directly between us, asking, "Ready?" And he takes the hint to move now. Again and again, we run into these guys, and once finished shopping, I'm afraid they might try to follow us outside, so we begin roaming all over the store, taking different routes and aisles. We seem to lose them after a while, and we both relax, figuring they gave up. Our Walmart has a self-checkout line made for grocery trips, so we start checking ourselves out. Halfway through unloading our items, I get that hair-standing feeling again as I turn, only to notice in the lane right next to us is, you guessed it, the same 5 guys. My stomach drops, eyes moving to my mom's, who stares at them with wide eyes and a furrowed brow. Trying to shake it off, we take our sweet time ringing things up. We figured seeing as the guys had no more than 10 items between them and we had a full cart, they would have to move on faster. Wrong. It seems no one else had decided to check out in our lanes, so they could go as slow as they'd like, and boy, did they. For the next 15 minutes, they stood there just watching us as we rang up our groceries, and every now and then ringing things up. Mum grabs my arm, and we share a look. I shake my head, starting to get freaked out, as Mum, starting to panic, grabs her phone and calls my dad. In her state of panic, however, she turns and wanders a few feet away, not her best moment, she admits, and when I turn to ring up the last few things, Ball-Cap Guy is standing right there. We stare at each other, him grinning with gross stained and messed up teeth. I only glare, dropping the chicken in the bag before reaching for the last item and ringing it up, still glaring at him in a stare down. Mom, now off the phone, hurries back over, only to see Ball-Cap standing there while the other four sit on the benches located 3 feet away watching us. Ball-Cap simply takes an empty Gatorade bottle he'd been holding and chucks it into the trash can by the register without breaking eye contact before he turns to go sit with his friends. Keep in mind they had a trash can right by their register as well, completely empty. Mom and I, not knowing what to do, start fiddling around, hoping they'd get impatient and leave. But they didn't. As we pay and get our receipt, they are still there, so Mum grabs my arm and steers me toward customer service, telling me that my dad told us to have security walk us out. The guys move and walk out once we head over, and I feel relieved they finally left. The ladies at customer service were amazing and very understanding and stood with us the whole time, while security, a big man with a calm and confident persona, came over, took their descriptions, and went to the front doors on both entrances to make sure they weren't still around. When he got back, he told us when he went out one entrance, he found 5 men matching their descriptions hanging around the front of the building out of sight unless you walk out of the door and turn around. He said the minute they saw him, they took off, and he promised to walk us to our car and let the officer outside know what was going on. We thanked him and the ladies, and we thankfully made it to our car with no problems and haven't seen those men again. My husband and I moved into this house about 9 months ago. At first, the neighbors seemed okay. We are the high and by type. There is a woman who lives directly across the street who I'll call Lucy. On Mother's Day, as my husband and I were leaving for brunch, Lucy wished me a happy Mother's Day, and I wished her the same. Lucy began approaching our driveway as we started to pull off. I didn't want to be rude, so I rolled down the window and told her we were in a hurry, and we could talk when I returned. She became hysterical, yelling obscenities and throwing her hands in the air. My husband pulled off. When we returned, we noticed 3 of our 4 planters on pedestal stands located outside the front door were turned over. As we got out the car, she ran out of the house and stood at the end of her driveway. She didn't say anything, and she just watched us. We decided to go to the store, replace the planters, and clean everything up when we put up the new planters. We also decided to get 6 wireless security cameras to put in all of our windows in case she pulled something like that again. When we pulled up, Lucy ran out again, but this time she brought a chair to the end of her driveway to watch us. As we were cleaning up and replacing the planters, a neighbor came to speak to us. He told us that the landlord should have warned us about Lucy, that the woman sometimes does things like that if she feels slighted or disrespected. Our response was, we're not there for her entertainment or companionship, and she needs to stay away from our property. When we began installing the cameras, she went back into the house. The next day, when we left for work, Lucy ran outside in a nightgown and stood at the end of the driveway with her arms folded. When we returned home, we saw the planters were moved but not knocked over. This time we weighted them down with rocks. We looked at the video and saw 2 girls, about ages 6 and 8, come from Lucy's house. They tried to push over the planters. When they didn't succeed, they went back to Lucy's house. We called the police to get the incidents on record in case Lucy decided to escalate. For the next 2 months, every time there was movement in the front of our house, Lucy would run outside. We decided to ignore her since it was clear she was mentally unstable. One day, when we came home from work, she blocked our driveway with her car. We called the police, who made her move it, but did nothing else. We explained the situation to the officer, who stated we should just keep records of her behavior and call if she makes contact with us. A week later, she blocked our driveway with her car again. We called the police again. This time, they gave her a ticket. Lucy continued to run outside any time there was movement, but now she also would pull up in her vehicle about a minute before us, wait in her car and get out when we got out. This happened no matter what time we got home after work. One night we noticed she was pulling out of a driveway at the end of the block. After this, we decided to use another entrance into the subdivision. This worked for about a week. Then she sat outside of that entrance and followed us in. I began videotaping these incidents with my camera. A month ago is when things really escalated. I came home for lunch and there was a huge trailer blocking my driveway. I asked the driver to move and he refused, stating his friend was visiting Lucy. I told him to move or I would call the police. He moved, but then moved back once I parked my car. I called the police and the number on the side of the trailer. The owner stated the trailer should not have been in a residential area and apologized. The police ticketed the trailer and made the driver leave. The man visiting Lucy was arrested for outstanding warrants for unauthorized entry and criminal trespassing. About a week after this incident, she followed us into the subdivision, parked her car, and ran to the end of our driveway. She yelled about us contacting the owner of the trucking company and how stupid we are for doing it. She turned around and went to her driveway when she saw I had my cell phone recording her. We called the police, who took another report and warned her to stay away from us and the house. She went on about how we didn't own the house and how she could go anywhere she wants to on our property. The officer warned her that if she does come on our property, she could be arrested. About a week ago, a group of kids came on our property, began fighting on the front lawn and throwing trash everywhere. Lucy sat on the porch and yelled for the kids to yell louder and fight more. We called the police. The officer told us they were just kids playing and they all denied being sent by Lucy. We showed the officer the video and he still refused to do anything. He told Lucy to stay away from us, a warning other officers have made and she ignores. The day after this, Lucy came outside and stood in the middle of the street watching us. She has continued to do this every day, including this morning. It is obvious the police is not going to do anything. We have 3 more months left on our lease. Needless to say, we're going to move. But until then, we will keep calling police and saving the video recordings of her stalking and harassing us. Six years ago, I tried Tinder for the first time. I was 25 at the time, and while most 25-year-old women have dabbled on Tinder or the like, I hadn't been single since I was 17. I met my ex while I was in high school. We got married 6 years later and had a baby. I was happy. But those last couple of years together, he had really begun to resent me and the family we had created together. I fought to keep our relationship together, but the abuse became more frequent and more intense. It got to the point where I took our baby and fled the house in the middle of the night. My mind was scarred and my heart was raw. It was a really difficult time in my life. A couple of months after I left, I had a new home, a new job, and a renewed sense of life. I was starting to open up and could feel myself healing. I was, however, lonely. I was adjusting to shared custody and spent my weekends alone. I didn't want to jump into a relationship, but I did want to experience some of the things my 8-year relationship hadn't allowed me. Joining Tinder felt fun. It was new and scary, and after so much trauma, it felt nice to have so much positive attention. My self-worth was low, so the cheap compliments and instant gratification of the app felt incredible. Who am I to deserve their attention? Why would they choose to speak to me of all women? It's not my healthiest coping mechanism, but I wanted to feel desirable. That's when I met Derek. Derek was an unassuming, average guy. He was cute enough, but not so attractive that I felt self-conscious. Derek and I shared a few interests, craft beer, hiking, and he had a sense of humor that I liked. We agreed to meet up at a local restaurant. I was so nervous as it was my first date in 8 years. I donned my cutest dress, got made up, and headed out. As I waited in the restaurant, my palms were sweaty, my heart was fluttering, and I began to question myself. He arrived and everything was awkward at first. We ordered our first beers and started to break the ice. As soon as the buzz of the alcohol began to hit, our conversation took off. We had relaxed in each other's company, and the rest of the date went smoothly. We joked about karaoke across town. I am a huge fan of karaoke. While I am no superstar, I have spent a good amount of time in choirs and can carry a tune well enough. One of my favorite rowdy weekend activities is going to that bar and busting out some songs with the sweet taste of gin on my tongue. I convinced him to go with me, and we left the restaurant. We sang into the night, taking shots, flirting, laughing. We ended the night in his truck, clumsily fumbling with each other's buttons and zippers, hearts racing with excitement. This had been what I needed. We texted back and forth more often, and soon we were talking about another date. I had enjoyed our time together and liked that I didn't feel a deep connection with him. It was fun, and that was it. Because my heart wasn't tangled up in feelings, he felt safe. We decided for our second date that we would go tubing down a river that runs through our town. We had parked his orange truck at the end of the tubing run and took the tubes in my truck upriver. We agreed that he would zip my truck key with his into a pocket on his shorts and that he would drop me off at my truck afterwards. The bright summer heat warmed our skin and the water felt crisp and fresh on our toes. The afternoon slipped past as we floated down the river. When we reached the bottom, we deflated our tubes and headed back to my truck. Only, when Derek reached into his pocket, his face sank. He looked at me and said, "Your key is gone." I laughed. Surely he was joking. He insisted this wasn't a joke. Gravity pulled at my stomach, and I began to panic. This was the only copy of my truck key, and I had taken it on the river. I felt foolish and worried about how I would get a new key if we couldn't find it. The river was long. We had been tubing for hours. We'd stopped at several places to swim. He offered to drive me home, and I accepted. During the drive, we made a plan to meet up the next day to search for my key at some of the stops we had made. We spent the next afternoon combing our swimming holes for my key. Up and down we swam, with very little hope that we would ever see my keys. We had to try, though, and we kept at it. From one spot to another, we drove, we swam, and we moved on. At the very last place we checked, as the light of afternoon faded into a hazy orange, something caught his eye. Underwater near the shore were my keys. We were elated and could not believe our luck. To celebrate, we went back to his place for some drinks. He drove me down a long wooded driveway, and at the very end was a shaded trailer. He told me that he was only renting a room here from an elderly couple, but they were on vacation, so we would be alone. We walked over the creaking porch and entered the trailer. Inside, I could see the kitchen was messy. Not just a couple of dishes, but every surface was covered with mess. He ushered me away to show me his room. It was small and not very clean either. There were dirty clothes, mattress on the floor, a Rubbermaid bin with some snacks like Doritos, and cheap, warm beer. We had sex, the yellowed light of the trailer accentuating the stains on the walls. Afterwards, the spark of fun I had felt when we first met had withered, and I felt gross. I decided that it would be our last date. A week passed, and we hardly texted. Our brief fling was ending, and I didn't expect to see him again. My mind moved on to other things. The coming weekend, my friends were coming to town, and I was excited. We made plans to go to karaoke together on Saturday night. When the day arrived, I was surprised to see a text from Derek on my phone. "Are you going to karaoke tonight?" it read. I responded that I was, and he texted back that he would be there. "I thought you didn't like karaoke," I asked him, and he said that he had been invited by a girl he worked with. He thought he should give me a heads up that he would be with a date in case I was there. I thanked him for taking the time to let me know, reassured him that I wouldn't be bothered at all, and said that I hoped he had a great date. Around 9 p.m. that night, my friends and I arrived at the bar. The dim lights and reflective foil stars, an all too familiar scene. We got our drinks and picked a booth with a good view of the stage. I had a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned my head, scanning the bar, and our eyes locked. Derek and his date were a few booths away, and he was watching us. He waved zealously with a big smile. His date turned around to look, and I managed an awkward wave. I was absolutely fine with him being on a date, but I didn't want to advertise that we knew each other or make his date uncomfortable. My friends were all aware of the time we had spent together, my thoughts on the experience, and the texts he had sent me earlier. We were all thinking it was a bit odd that he would go out of his way to interact with me in front of his date, but no harm, no foul, I guess. Maybe he was just being friendly. The evening carried on, and we all had a great time basking in the atmosphere, drinking in the songs and the laughter. A couple of hours in, we were sitting in our booth when Derek stumbled over to our table with his date. He introduced her as Kate. He then plopped down beside me, pulling her down into our booth next to him. The strong smell of alcohol oozed off of them, and I could see they were hammered. It became obvious they had both had too much to drink, their eyes glazed and words slurred. Kate seemed really nice, despite her state, and she launched into a drunk story to the whole table. My friends and I were fairly uncomfortable and were unsure what was going on. Under the table, I felt Derek's sticky hand slide onto my thigh. His date was right there, and I was stunned. Without making a scene, I subtly removed his hand and excused myself to get another drink. As I walked across the room, I could feel his eyes raking my back, and sure enough, when I turned around, he was watching. When I got back, Kate was slurring that her taxi had come. She and Derek exchanged a sloppy kiss and good nights, and then it was just us and Derek. Derek's mood shifted after that. He was drunkenly unaware of how uncomfortable the table was, and we could tell he was brooding about his date having left without him. Derek turned his attention to me. He slung his heavy arm over my shoulder and leaned in, his sour breath managing to come together to form clumsy sentences. He said I am cute, and he loves my laugh. I was rigid and just wanted him to leave. When he got up to get another beer, my friends and I spoke about the situation. One of them remarked, "You know you can do better than this, right?" I said that yes, as casual as this had been, I had made a mistake. We came to the conclusion it would be best if we ended the night early, as we didn't see him leaving me alone. As a backup plan, if anything went south, we agreed that the girls would go to the bathroom and leave out the back door while our male friend would distract him and slip away. Derek arrived back at the table, sloshing his beer onto his front. He slurred and asked, "Where are we going next?" I hesitated, but my friend told him that we would all be going home. Derek said he would walk us there, and we politely declined. He was leaning up against a wall and barely holding himself up at this point. We asked him how he was going to get home and if we could call him a cab. Derek drunkenly pouted that he could just come to my place with me. Trying to shut him down as politely as I could, I told him that my child was there with a sitter, so I couldn't have him over. He didn't need to know that wasn't true. He refused a taxi and said he would just sleep in his truck. Since his eyelids were drooping and looking at the rest of his state, it seemed reasonable that he would be able to fall asleep in a truck, and we accepted that answer. As we started to leave, he stumbled after us. We stopped and reminded him that we were going to bed. He argued again that he should come with me. My friends and I locked eyes. It was time to engage with our backup plan. The two girls and I excused ourselves to the washroom while our friend distracted him. Slipping out the back door, the cool rush of night air hit us, and we hurried to the path that led to their hotel. Our friend caught up with us and said he had left Derek behind at the bar. We were all relieved to be out of there and started the walk back to their hotel. One of the girls was sober and offered to drive me home when we got to the hotel, and I accepted. A few minutes down the path, my phone began to ring. I looked at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. It was Derek. I turned the volume down and let it ring, and to my surprise, he left a voicemail. I turned on the speaker and played it out loud. Derek's voice sounded confused as his words melted together into the phone. He was asking where we are, thinking that we were going to hang out. We were all glad we had left and agreed that this had been wild. That's when the phone rang again. Another voicemail popped up on my screen. In the dim light of the trail, I played the new voicemail aloud once more. His drunken speech was more intense this time, as he launched into how he didn't understand why I had left. He said I had hurt his feelings, and he was in love with me. The tone of his voice shook me when I heard him say he loved me. There was something dark and heavy about it that left me feeling unsettled. We were all creeped out, but happy to see the bright sign of the hotel ahead. We travelled the carpeted hallway to their room so my friend could grab her keys to take me home. As we entered the room, my phone began to ring again. This time, the voicemail sent shockwaves of fear through my body. Derek's voice had taken on an edge as he repeated that he loved me, but he was actually really mad at me for leaving him at the bar. He went on about how could I do that to him, and he didn't know what he was going to do. His voice shook with anger as he stumbled over himself, expressing how I had betrayed him. The last thing he said before hanging up echoed in the hotel room. He said in stern voice, "You know, I'm really starting to hate you." This guy was unhinged, and I was terrified. I was grateful this side of Derek hadn't shown up when we were alone in his secluded trailer. My friends gave me a hug and told me to call them if I needed anything and to keep them updated. My friend took me home, and as I unlocked the door and stepped into the comfort of home, I felt exhausted. It had not been the night out I expected, and Derek's erratic behavior had really freaked me out. Fresh out of an abusive relationship, his actions at the bar, then the voicemails rang some all-too-familiar bells. That's when I saw the headlights. It was very late for anyone to be driving down my street. I peeked through the curtain. My blood ran cold and I trembled. Sitting in the cab of his orange truck was Derek. Mind racing, I panicked. This dude could barely hold himself up when we left, and he was blackout, obliterated. How did he drive across town to my house? How did he find me? I immediately remembered the other week when he dropped me off after my key was lost. How could I have been so stupid? I barely knew him, and we had only met 3 times. Derek's face was stony and etched with rage as he sat in the dark cab staring at my house. He wasn't getting out. He was just staring, while I was on my hands and knees peeking out the window. All the lights were off inside, so I was sure he couldn't see me. Then, the screen on my phone lit up. He was calling me again. I quickly hid it so he wouldn't see the light. Hands shaking, I played the voicemail as quietly as I could. Derek only said one thing this time, a phrase that sent terror shooting down my spine. In a drunken sing-song voice, almost taunting me, he quietly said, "Where are you?" I was terrified. Somehow, I hadn't really considered I could be in danger and chalked up all of the fear to my past experiences. Surely I was overreacting, and it was my fault for reading too much into this. I thought I shouldn't be this scared, and I don't want to make a scene. That last voicemail sealed the deal. I figured even if I was overreacting, at the very least he was a drunk driver. I called 911, and the dispatcher said someone would be there in a couple of minutes. As I peeked out the window, I saw him get out of his truck. He was done waiting. His heavy feet stumbled as they hit the pavement, and he looked around. Derek's voice cut through the night. He started yelling my name. The wild anger in his voice was tangible through the walls, and he just yelled into the street. He yelled, "Where are you?" Derek started to stumble towards my house when the flashing red and blue lights cascaded down the street, lighting up his face and highlighting every ounce of rage carved into his features. 2 police cars pulled up, and the officers got out. I was still peeking out from inside my dark house and couldn't hear much of what was happening. I watched them breathalyze him, which he obviously failed. The officers inspected his truck. They all spoke for a while, and one of the officers came to my door. I spoke to him about what had happened, and he was very empathetic. He said as unsettling as his actions had been, there wasn't much they could do without a direct threat. The officer let me know that they would be taking him in for the night, and he would be charged with drunk driving. He told me Derek would be out tomorrow and to make sure I kept my doors locked and stayed safe. The tow truck came to remove his orange truck from the road, and I could see him arguing. The officers weren't having any of it, and they turned him around to cuff him. As the handcuffs locked around his wrist, he yelled out one last time. Looking directly at the window I was peeking out, he yelled, "I know you're in there. Why don't you come out to say goodnight?" As quickly as my street had filled up, it was empty. The quiet shadows of late night swallow the earlier chaos into nothingness. Derek texted me the next afternoon. "I'm very sorry about last night. I was in a bad place." I responded that his actions were unacceptable, and how dare he show up at the house my child lives at, and that I would prefer not to hear from him again. He apologized one last time, and I haven't heard from him since. Over the next few months, I would see him on a bike going to and from his workplace, so I know he lost his license. I was always wary that we would bump into each other, which thankfully never happened. I can only imagine how much angrier he was after that night lost him his license. I found out that he moved to the mainland a while back, which was quite a relief for me. I no longer feel as on edge around town. I live in a very rural, mountainous area of California, and at this time was working as a cook in a restaurant and bar. I was 24 and not in the best place financially at the time, so I had been borrowing my uncle's car to drive to and from work. I worked from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. I know everyone in this area well, and I don't have a single enemy. I get along with everyone. One night, I had gotten done closing up the kitchen and decided to have a beer before going home. The bartender was talking to a fellow community member and trying to get him to go home. He was too drunk for his own good. There were some out-of-towners that weren't too fond of the locals' demeanor, and it seemed like it was getting intense between them. I just saw it as a local that I knew as being annoyingly drunk but perfectly harmless. I had my beer, went out, and got in the car. I could see inside the bar and spotted the drunk local, completely smashed. I felt bad for not offering a ride home, but I was tired from work and told myself he'd be okay. I drive away. Mind you, there are no street lamps and no buildings. It's the middle of nowhere, pitch black and very quiet. I realized about a mile from the bar that I should turn around and offer the local a ride home. He didn't live far, and it wouldn't be far out of my way to do so. I turn around at a muddy turnout and go back. I get in the bar, and I basically was short with the local and told him that I would pick him up in the morning and he could get his truck, sober. I also said that I'll give him a ride home tonight. I was 24 at the time, and a small-built female. He was a smaller-built, mid-30s looking male. I knew this guy had hit on me in the past, but I assumed he was just a 35-year-old weirdo who was lonely. I always shrugged off his advances. Anyway, with a couple of minutes of reasoning, he finally hopped in the car and I took off, driving towards his home. It's about 5 miles away on winding mountain roads. I didn't notice anything really at first. He seemed drunk, quiet, and mumbly. But not too long into the drive, he starts saying thank you and how nice I am to help him out. I say the usual. Of course, no problem. I couldn't let him be there, knowing full well he wasn't able to drive. This is where I start getting creeped out. I make a turn on the road he lives on. It's a long road and not many properties out there. All of the driveways are long, about a mile or two, so you don't see any houses. He gets really quiet and it's dark in the car. I can't see him really well. I notice him look at me though. I could see the reflection of his eyes from the dim lights on the radio. This is something I remember very vividly. His eyes were gleaming kind of green from the lights on the radio knobs. He was just looking at me. I, without returning his gaze, said, "What's up? Why are you looking at me like that?" He says to me, "You're so pretty, and I never get this chance to be alone with you." I shrugged it off, trying to play it cool, although I started regretting my decision. All of a sudden, he reaches over to me while I'm driving and tries to put his hand. I'm assuming it was on my breast, but instead, his hands land on between my shoulder and neck. I start yelling at him, telling him to stop. I slam on my brakes in the middle of the road. No one is behind me, There's no one for miles. Then I scream at him to get out of the car right now. I repeat it over and over. At this point, I had my hands off the wheel and I was trying to push him out of the car. I had leaned over and opened the car door. I had never, in my life, realized my own strength, my own weak strength. This 30-something male was not budging against me. I notice him laughing a really sloppy laugh. He says, "You and I both know that no one is around." I told him we just left the bar and at least 5 people know where I am going, so he should stop. I handed him a flashlight, told him to walk home, and I was done with him for the night. He is quiet for a minute before saying, "I don't feel like walking much." The way he said it scared the living hell out of me. I start screaming, not like a hoarse scream, but like an ear-piercing scream. I knew the scream was strong and loud, and I had even hurt my own ears, just hoping someone had their windows open somewhere off in the woods. But nothing happened. We struggled for what felt like minutes as he kept trying to come at me. This entire time he was kind of laughing. He was drunk, so that was probably my only advantage. He was sloppy and trying to attack me for whatever reason. I pushed on him like I had never pushed on anything in my life. I pushed so hard that I felt my arms just burning with pain. When he finally gets out of the car, I slam on the gas, not even bothering with the door. Remember, I was headed down a long road in the middle of nowhere and not on my road. It's a dead-end road after about 20 miles, so I keep driving down this road I know well, knowing full well I will need to stop to turn around. This road is like 1.5 lanes wide and there's hardly any turnouts. When I finally do, I turn around fast and in someone's dirt driveway, afraid of the car being still for even a second. I take off driving, knowing he'll be up ahead any second. I never see him. I never see him again. He was a local I'd known for years and saw frequently. I don't know if he took off to another area from embarrassment or what, but I never saw him again. I arrived home shaking, red, scratched, and out of breath. My boyfriend and our friend were at home playing Jenga, and I told them immediately. They knew who it was too, and they went to try and find him. We never saw him again. This happened back about a week and a half before Easter. For some background, I am a 29-year-old female, about 5'1" and about 120 pounds. However, most people mistake me for a 15 to 16-year-old girl. The youngest I have ever been mistaken for was about a 9 to 10-year-old kid, but that was by my nanny's best friend who hadn't seen me in years and just assumed I was one of her great-grandchildren. It was actually quite funny, and we all had a good laugh. Anyways, on to the weird encounter. My mom needed to go to Walmart to pick up a few things that my dad had asked her to get, and some stuff they both needed in preparation for their upcoming trip to go to West Virginia, riding on the Hatfield and McCoy trails they have up there. My mom, dad, one of my sisters, her husband, and my 4 nephews and nieces were going for Easter weekend. This would be my mom's first time going, and she wasn't really happy that they planned the trip on Easter weekend, but they assured her they would be back early Sunday so we could still celebrate and have Easter dinner with my other 2 sisters and other 4 nephews and nieces. When we got there, my mum got a basket and headed off to the hair care and pharmacy section, and I told her that I was going to go look in the bedding department to see if they still had any fleece blankets left over that they had on sale. I used them for my guinea pigs. So she said that if I got done before her, she would still be around that area and to look for her there. I managed to find a few blankets left and got them and headed off to find my mom to stick them in the basket. She was right. She was still in the same section, and it seemed like she would be there forever. Across the way was where they had all of their Easter candy and decorations, so I told her I was going to go see if they had any of those pooping animal-themed candy dispensers. My sister gave me one years ago as sort of a joke for Easter, and coincidentally I loved it, so she has been giving me one every year since for Easter, Christmas, and whatever other holidays they make them for. I have quite the collection and love getting them. It is a long-standing and fun tradition between me and my sister. When I get over to the Easter section, there is no one there but me, and I'm relieved because most of the time people are flocked there in the seasonal sections like moths to a flame and refuse to move from their spots to let anyone else get a look. So I'm browsing through and checking out the candy when this guy comes around the corner into the aisle I'm in. He's a nice-looking young guy. He looks to be about 19 to 20, and at first all seems well. I'm going on looking at all of the stuff when I get this feeling as if he is staring at me, so I move down the aisle, pretending to look at the stuff while trying to gauge if he is actually staring at me or not, and he is. I thought to myself, okay, he's just a young guy, and probably thinks I'm a young girl around his age, and he's just checking me out or something. After another minute or two of this, it becomes clear he isn't looking at anything in the aisle but me, and every time I glance his way, he averts his gaze really quickly and pretends to be checking out a product. At this point, it just becomes too weird for me. If he would have said something, I think maybe I would have felt more comfortable, but he just kept staring holes right through me, and it began to make me feel uneasy. While he was pretending to look at the product on the shelf and trying to look intently interested in it, I seized the chance to quickly move around to the aisle on the other side. He didn't see which way I went, and when I was in the other aisle alone for a bit, I felt that maybe I was just being too paranoid, and that's when I look up to see him standing right next to me. I never heard him or seen him enter, and boom, he's right there all up in my space. I'm kind of startled by this, and then my creep meter goes up, and I start to get the heebie-jeebies and this feeling of something ain't right with this dude. So I move on down the aisle, trying not to show any fear, and a couple of seconds, and he's moving right along with me. So I quickly turn around, as if I'm looking at something on the shelves behind me, and he does the same. About that time, thank God, some woman comes down the aisle with her buggy and startles him. So I move to another aisle. I'm in there for a bit before he finds me again, and he slowly starts inching his way closer and closer to me. He's wearing a hooded sweatshirt, and as he gets closer, he starts putting his hands under his shirt, and it sounds like he is fiddling with his belt buckle all the while stealing glances of me. At this time, I'm panicking inside and trying to move away from him, but he follows me everywhere. I look him straight in the face, and he is just staring blankly at me, all the while still doing whatever it is he is doing under his shirt. About that time, both the woman from the other aisle and my mum come in, and I'm so relieved. My mum tells me that she is going to the food department, and I just say, I'll go with you. At that point, I wasn't about to go anywhere by myself in that store with that weirdo on my heels. As we leave, he is acting all normal, as if he wasn't doing anything creepy, and picks up a bag of random candy and walks out of the other end of the aisle. Finally, I feel relieved and that I'm in the clear, so on the way to the food section, I remembered I needed to stop by the pet department and get my dog Otis a bag of his favorite treats. So, my mum continues on to the drink aisle, and as I pick up a bag of dog biscuits, I look to my left, and to my horror, there is this guy again. He has still been following me this whole time, and now he's got me alone again. At this point, I'm really wishing we had come to Walmart when it was like rush hour and the place was packed like sardines. At least I wouldn't find myself so isolated and alone with this creepy dude. I get my dog treats and walk as fast as I can out of the aisle, headed for the drink section where my mum said she would be. Thank God she is there, and I stick my treats in the basket and decide I'm not going anywhere else in that store alone. Throughout the whole entire time we were there, he was in every single aisle we went in, just staring me down and looking for any opportunity when he might find me by myself again, but I never gave him the chance. We got our stuff and went to check out. He tried to check out in the line 2 lanes away in hopes, I guess, of following us out, but thank God the little old lady in front of him picked up something that didn't have a price tag, and she held up that line, and he couldn't go anywhere else. By that time, we were finished checking out and got the heck out of there. As we were loading the stuff in the car, I saw him come out of the front door and just stand on the sidewalk scanning to see where I went, but he never saw me because I hid on the other side of the car, and he gave up. I told my mum about it on the way home, and she agreed with me that he was acting strangely in a stalker-like manner, and that he very well must have thought I was just some 15 to 16-year-old girl alone. Who knows what his intentions were? If in fact I had been 15 to 16 and alone, he may very well have followed me out and tried to kidnap me. But who knows? And I hope no one ever has to find out. I had 4 friends in high school. We ate lunch together, had sleepovers together, and threw parties together. My best friend, Naomi, was in the group, as was another girl named Tina. Tina suffered from bipolar disorder, depression, and mild dissociative identity disorder, but she would keep this a secret for 4 more years. She always had dark blemishes on her arms and legs, which she would later confess were self-inflicted burns. She alluded to her difficult home life, but never elaborated. All through high school, I was unaware of her difficulties. We sat together in class, but never really bonded. She was difficult to talk to, as she never opened up and rarely expressed emotion. It was a bit like talking to a brick wall. Though we would joke around sometimes, I didn't really enjoy her company. Everything between us felt forced. I began to harbor resentment, as she appropriated Naomi as her own. They began to do everything together. Their friendship was unnervingly intense. It seemed like they would spend almost every night together, and I was jealous, as Tina took up all of Naomi's time. I'll note that Naomi was beautiful, popular, and from a wealthy family, while Tina was just the opposite. She's a very thin, tiny, not especially attractive person who always wore ripped jeans and hoodies zipped up to her neck. Presumably, it was to hide the burns. The contrast between them was striking, and they're quite an unlikely pair. After graduation, 2 of the girls in our friend group moved off, while Tina, Naomi, and I enrolled in the same local university. When classes started, Tina and Naomi stopped spending time together. I awoke one morning, around 1 a.m., to a distressing series of text messages from Tina. Along the texts were lines like, "I can't do it anymore, and I'm sorry to those who still care." I called Tina repeatedly, but she never answered. I sent her a text message threatening to call the police, and finally she responded. She confided in me about her disorders, her lifelong depression, and how Naomi had abandoned her. The texting lasted for hours and became a nightly ritual, much to my chagrin, as Tina would sometimes threaten to kill herself if I did not reply. I lost a lot of sleep that semester. Tina and I took an English class together, which she frequently skipped. One day, though, I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding I felt when she didn't show up for class. She never answered her phone, and so I went to her dorm. I explained my situation to the help desk, that she's a potentially suicidal friend, really worried, etc., but they were absolutely useless. I managed to slip past another student into the stairwell, and I ran up to Tina's room. I knocked and knocked, but she never answered, so I went and got the RA. The RA beat on the door with impressive vigor, and finally a disheveled Tina answered. She was pissed. A few weeks later, she would curse me out via text, as always. She refused to speak on the phone for embarrassing her like that. One night, Tina confessed that some anonymous person, to whom she never assigned a masculine or feminine pronoun, was the source of her depression. They had dated for many years and recently broken up. Tina loved them, was obsessed with them, and could not live without them. I couldn't imagine who this person was. How had Tina maintained a secret relationship all through high school? Then again, she was good at keeping secrets. About a month later, before Thanksgiving break, Tina drank 2 bottles of flu medicine and wound up in the ICU. I visited her and gave the perfunctory post-suicide attempt lectures, although everything sounded so cliché out loud. I finally worked up the courage to ask if she was in love with Naomi. She confirmed this and assured me that she was not a lesbian, saying that Naomi was the only girl to whom she had ever been attracted. They had this intense, indescribable bond. Tina had fallen for her instantly. I felt bad that she had felt the need to hide her sexuality from her closest friends all through high school, although I was mainly bewildered that Tina and Naomi had managed to date secretly for so long. Naomi was my best friend, after all. Tina told me about her 4+ guy friends who had committed suicide recently, one of whom was a close childhood friend. I couldn't believe it. I felt awful for her, yet spending time with her was still a chore. We had virtually nothing in common. I was bound to her by a sense of obligation and by my link to Naomi. Over Christmas break, Naomi informed me that Tina had died in a car accident a week prior. She had been riding in a car with 3 other teenagers in the early hours of the morning. They were all high, and the driver crashed into a tree. A branch impaled her lung. The funeral was private, and Tina's family didn't want to be bothered. I felt oddly numb, considering how much time I had spent trying to prevent Tina's death. However, I was relieved that she had not died by her own hand, and I hoped she was in heaven. I couldn't find an obituary, but I found an article detailing an accident involving 4 anonymous teens in a nearby town. Later that afternoon, one of my friends called me and said that Tina's not dead. Suspicious of the circumstances surrounding Tina's demise, she drove to Tina's house and found her watching TV on the couch. Naturally, I was livid. However, Tina apologized, saying that she never meant for it to go that far. I told her that she was harassing Naomi, but she was defensive. Unable to shake my sense of obligation, I continued to spend time with her. Meanwhile, Naomi, who I didn't see much that semester, was being harassed by a myriad of anonymous texters claiming to be Tina's drug dealers. "We know where you live," they would say. Some messages also said, "We want the best for Tina. Get back together with her." Once, they told Naomi that Tina had just overdosed, and it was all her fault. Naomi cried for a week, too full of shame to tell anyone. After 7 days, she received a text message. "I'm not dead. I just wanted you to know how you would feel." Gradually, they overdosed, one by one. Each texter would be replaced by a new one when the old one died off, each more hostile than the last. "This is all your fault. There's blood on your hands, and you're not taking responsibility. We're coming for you." Naomi changed her cell phone number 3 times to no avail. "You think you can get rid of us that easily?" they would ask. One night, she received a text message saying that one of the drug dealers had found Tina's dead body hanging from a belt in her closet. Naturally, Naomi was skeptical. The dealer then sent Naomi a picture of Tina's face, her eyes closed, and a belt around her neck. Naomi didn't know what to believe. Eventually, Tina, miraculously resurrected, began texting her again. Naomi asked her to call off the druggies, but she refused, claiming they only wanted to help her. One night, Tina Skyped Naomi from a hotel room. She said that she had used her savings to buy a ticket to New York City, where she intended to off herself after visiting the major landmarks. Well, she had gone sightseeing that morning, so it was time. Naomi sat on her bed in a stupor, refusing to look at the webcam. After 20 minutes of awkward silence, Tina's face disappeared from the screen. She texted Naomi that she had slit her wrists and was unable to Skype because of the copious amount of running down her arms and pooling on the computer. However, she later informed Naomi that the hotel staff had broken into her room, seen her half-dead body, and managed to revive her. On another night, the drug dealers texted Naomi that Tina had just told them goodbye for the last time. She had somehow obtained a firearm, and she planned to drive to an abandoned road and do it. After some time passed, one of the drug dealers informed Naomi that they had found Tina's car on the side of the road. It was empty, and blood was splattered on the headrest. They said that they managed to track Tina down by following a trail of blood leading from the car to a field. They gathered up her body and took her to one of their houses. One of their dads was apparently a doctor, and they wished to avoid the attention that taking her to a legitimate hospital would garner. The dad hooked Tina up to a crash cart and allowed her to speak to Naomi on the phone every night that week. And every night, Tina would call Naomi, the beeping of her heart monitor in the background, and ask to hear a story. In the midst of the story, the heart monitor would suddenly flatline and the call would hang up. Then, a number would text Naomi saying that Tina had just flatlined, but she would generally recover within the hour. On one of the nights, the doctor texted Naomi saying that in his professional opinion, Tina would not last the night. He offered to pick up Naomi at her dorm to let her say goodbye, and she agreed. He told her to look for a red truck. She stayed up all night, but the truck never showed. A few days later, Tina resumed contact with Naomi, having been resurrected once more. She begged Naomi to come to her dorm room because she was hurt. She had been jumped. Earlier that evening, having recovered from the trauma of shooting herself in the head, Tina had decided to take a nighttime stroll about the campus. A gang of girls descended on her, knocked her head against a brick wall, pushed her down, kicked her repeatedly in the stomach, and stole her wallet. Somehow, Tina managed to crawl back up to her room and get into bed before apprising Naomi of this tragedy. When Naomi came over, Tina indeed had a scratch on her forehead, a black eye, and bruises all over her stomach and legs. The druggies hacked into Naomi's computer, stole her contact information, and changed all of her passwords. Since Tina had written Naomi's college application essay, they threatened to tell the administration and have Naomi kicked out of school. They texted Naomi's parents, pretending to be concerned classmates. They said that Naomi was partying every night and failing all of her classes. Finally, Naomi was forced to spill all to her family. They resolved to file a police report the next day. When Naomi told Tina that she intended to file a report on her friends, Tina appeared on her doorstep, crying, "Please don't do this. Everything will trace back to me. I don't know how they did it, but everything will trace back to my computer." Naomi filed a report the next day, nonetheless, to both the campus and local police. They promised to look into the matter, but nothing ever came of it. One night, Tina texted Naomi saying that she had just swallowed a whole bottle of pills and was preparing to drink 2 more. Naomi reluctantly traversed the campus and arrived at Tina's dorm. Tina let her in the front door and led her up to her bedroom, where she crawled into bed and began shaking and shivering and claiming to have hallucinations. Naomi waited for Tina to go to sleep, then stood to go. Tina opened her eyes and asked where Naomi was going, to which she replied, "I can't deal with you anymore," or something along those lines. Tina got out of bed and retrieved another bottle of flu meds, which she began drinking. When Naomi ripped it away and poured it down the sink, Tina retrieved another bottle and started drinking, saying, "This is all your fault," between gulps. Naomi snatched that bottle too and left. It was about this time that Tina landed in the hospital and everything came to light. Naomi and I began spending time together again, and she told me about how their romantic relationship began. During our junior year of high school, while Naomi was riding back from the metropolis with her parents, Tina texted her saying that she just couldn't do it anymore. "I have the pills right here. If you don't come over, I'm going to do it." Well, still being 3 hours out of town, there was little Naomi could do. When she arrived back in town, Tina said that she had already taken enough pills to off herself. She begged Naomi to come over, but being without a car and with parents that did not approve of Tina and refused to drop their daughter off at Tina's house, Naomi had to stay at home. Tina then drove across town in her weakened state and picked Naomi up herself. They drove back to Tina's house and lay on her bed, crying. After several hours, Tina said that she thought it was time. Thinking it was the only thing that would cheer Tina up in her final moments, Naomi kissed her. Suddenly revived in the manner of Snow White or Sleeping Beauty, Tina stood up and went into the kitchen to make spaghetti. Where were her parents during all of this? I have no idea. Now, back to college. I attempted to distance myself from Tina after her fake death, but before I could cut things off cold turkey, I felt compelled to convince her to visit a preacher I know who's really good with counseling. I thought this would help, especially since Tina once told me that she knew demons were inhabiting her body. She said she could feel them come and go as they pleased. One day, Tina told me that she had a brain tumor. She didn't yet know whether it was malignant or benign, but she needed me to pick her up from a procedure the following week. Naturally, I wasn't to tell her mother because Tina didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. Tina was to have a stereotactic brain biopsy in which 4 small holes are drilled into the skull in order to support a metal halo. Another hole is drilled at the site of the tumor, and a needle is then inserted through the skull into the brain. So, on the day of the appointed procedure, I called the hospital. They said they had no patients by that name. When I picked her up, she was sitting at a picnic table outside the hospital with no wristband and no discharge papers. She was wearing a baseball cap, and I asked to see the site of the incision, but she refused to remove the cap because the breeze was irritating her holes. That week, after much persuasion, she agreed to see the preacher, but only if I would drive her. Was I leery about driving someone who claimed to be intermittently possessed by demons to something they thought was an exorcism? Yes. So when the preacher cancelled the appointment due to the birth of his granddaughter, I was rather relieved. I never saw her again after that day at the hospital, except from a distance. We still go to the same school. The last text I sent to her was to say that the appointment was cancelled. Irritated by my aloofness, she sent me a barrage of texts a few days later, talking about how she was worried by my silence, how much she loved me, etc. I guess I feared transference, so I never responded. Frankly, I was glad to be done with it. She is still alive and in a long-term relationship with another girl. Ironically, it's one of her old roommates during all those shenanigans. She still texts Naomi every once in a blue moon, asking to revive their friendship. I work as a barista in a coffee shop inside this big store. I'm one of the few guys on the barista squad, and I'm pretty open about being gay. I got pride shoes, a flag on my name tag, the whole shebang. One day, I'm manning the register, and this dude strolls up and flashes a smile. I figure he spotted the pride flag on my tag, but he doesn't mention it right away. He's all undecided about what to order and asks for my recommendation. Now, I'm no coffee connoisseur, but I can suggest a decent drink. As I'm talking, though, I notice he's more into checking me out than listening to my coffee wisdom, which, hey, I'm cool with. This guy's on the shorter side, but built, with killer eyes and a nice beard. He settles on some super sweet ice drink, and I whip it up. Meanwhile, a co-worker leans over and whispers, "I think that dude just snapped a pic of you." Weird, right? I brush it off and hand him the drink. He loves the pride flag and asks where to snag one. I tell him I got it at a pride event a while back. Then he said, "Where can I get the person it's attached to?" I feel my cheeks blush, but I keep it professional. He grabs his drink, sits at a table, and from there, things get odd. He's staring at me whenever I glance his way, not even touching his drink. During my break, I offer to remake it, but he's not sure if it's too sweet. Then, he asks me to taste it. I politely decline since I don't do coffee, even if I work in a coffee shop. Then he starts with weird questions like, "Do you lift? And how many pounds can you lift?" Red flags pop up. His questions and behavior feel off, like he's sizing me up for a fight or something. I cut the chat short and get back to work. He keeps sitting there, not sipping his drink and taking phone calls. I start feeling more eyes on me. I'm not sure if I am being paranoid, but I saw a man pass by outside our shop a couple of times, and he exchanged subtle glances with the guy. I tell a manager, and they say they'll keep an eye on him. Closing time rolls around, and he's still there. He asks to walk me to my car when I'm off, but I tell him it's a 45-minute process after closing. He insists he'll wait and asks when I'm working next. I say I'm off for a couple of weeks. Now he's all, "I should walk you to your car, especially if I might not see you for a couple of weeks." It's a hard pass for me. I decline, finish closing, and head to the employee area. I ask a manager if I can use the side exit, because things are feeling weird. They agree and offer to walk with me to my car. I'm cool with it, so we head out. As I drive off, I notice a sketchy van with tinted windows parked up front. No idea if he's in there, but I'm not about to find out. I take the long way home. So, to the hot guy I served coffee to, I hope we do not meet again. Unless, of course, I misread things and he was just terribly socially awkward. Years ago, I was an active live journaler, and so was my girlfriend at the time. Somehow, she met this dude, Jeff. Despite being a hardcore born-again Christian and Republican, complete with a Confederate flag in his bio, he wanted to be friends with us, a pair of college-aged girls in a lesbian relationship. Even then, I was sure all he wanted was pictures of us making out. I friended him back to humor my very persistent girlfriend. At first, he seemed like a pretty normal dude. He lived in New England, worked in a hardware store, recently moved towards Florida to be close to his girlfriend, Julie. But then I noticed a weird through line of his posts. Every single one was about this girlfriend, and now they had somehow been separated against their will, and he couldn't contact her and was basically dying from heartbreak. At one point, he mentioned that he last saw her at the end of her sophomore year of college, which, given this guy's lack of physical appeal and age, was really out of the blue. Around this time, my GF started texting him, and he was immediately super clingy, doing the whole hi and hello with emoji thing for literally 40 texts if she didn't respond right away. But through this, she learned more about his relationship. They'd met on LiveJournal and started dating online, but when he moved to be close to her and her parents found out about him, they broke it off. They planned to reconnect when she got back to college in the fall, but in the meantime he was trying to contact her via any means necessary. He claimed her friends, also disgusted by the age difference, had gone behind her back and blocked him from all of her accounts and on her phone. My girlfriend, perhaps feeling the societally forbidden love sympathy, said she'd help him track her down. I didn't really buy it, like, why not make a new account or whatever? Why not just tell your friends to back off? This was more than 10 years ago now, so I'm shaky on the details, but something specific hit me, and I decided to Google him as best as I could. I'm glad I did, because my girlfriend had just found a ton of personal info on this girl and was about to pass it along to him. She really dug the whole forbidden love thing. I found Julie's LiveJournal, and her public entries all hinted that she was healing from something really horrible, real bummer. As for the rest, I have no memory of how I was able to find it. The first info I was able to find on Jeff is that he'd been fired at a job in New England for hitting on a teenage girl, and then it got really messed up. Jeff found Julie on LiveJournal when she was 15, and he was in his late 30s. She was young and lonely, and they'd cyber all the time. Then one day he just showed up outside her high school 1,000 miles away and told her that they could run away together. I don't know if she only later realized she'd been victimized by a dude twice her age, or if it was an all-out abuse, but either way, sex happened in his car. She reported it to the cops and got a restraining order against him. His whole story of her parents breaking off the relationship was technically true, but he'd left out some pretty major details. By the time my girlfriend and I were talking to him, he'd been stalking Julie for 4 years. We'd been talking to a turbo stalker and child offender, and perhaps unwittingly, helping him to find this girl. I called the cops, but it turns out there wasn't much they could do. He hadn't found her specifically. Unless he violated the restraining order, they couldn't really arrest a dude for posting sappy stuff on his journal and refreshing her LiveJournal profile. Luckily, we were able to delete him a few days later without having to confront him about any of it when he texted my girlfriend a bunch of really disgusting sexual comments about me. Problem solved. I blocked him on Facebook and haven't heard from him since. I genuinely hope Julie got free of him too, and that he's like dead in a ditch somewhere in Florida. A couple of years back when I was in college, I was the victim of a long-term stalker. I am a male, 20 at the time. It started out fairly innocuous. On Valentine's Day, I started to receive secret admirer-type text messages from an unknown number. I assumed it was a friend of mine playing a joke, as I was in a room with a handful of tech-savvy people at the time. I tried to gauge their reactions and asked if anyone was messing with me. They all denied it, and I believed them, as they were pretty bad liars. It was further confirmed that it was none of them. When I got a phone call from the number, a voice on the other end said, "Is this John Morgan?" I replied, "Yes. Who is this?" I was hoping I could identify the voice. At that point, they hung up and resumed texting. Things started to get weirder when the person began asking pretty personal questions. They were repeatedly asking, "Are you doing something tonight?" I sometimes replied yes and that I was busy working, but they kept insisting we should meet up. On top of all this, I was getting various images sent to me from a separate email from a service called Text Now. This confirmed it wasn't a real number, and I now had a username to connect to the person. I don't know if it was their intention, but I actually enjoy trying to figure out mysteries like this. I took it upon myself to expose this person without giving away anything about myself, so I kept it up. I texted them back for a while and dug more and more information about the person. I tried compiling these into a profile and eliminating possibilities. Unfortunately, this just encouraged them as they insisted I send pictures over and over. I know, it was my bad. Then, they sent a weird one. It was a photo of a white lacy dress hanging in their closet with an accompanying text. "This is my wedding dress for when I marry you." It has various heart and love emojis. They continued to pry about where I was going to be that evening, and I still refused to give details. Then they dropped where they were going to be, a party on campus that night. I couldn't go regardless as I was working. Then I got another bombshell. They asked if I lived in apartment 68, which I did. I recognized the style of apartment they were in based on a picture they sent earlier, so I decided I'd throw a curveball. "You live in Mahogany Complex, right?" They asked, how did I know that? I told them I recognized their door. All those apartments had the same color of door frame, which was visible in the edge of a picture they sent. The conversation kind of fizzled out here. I didn't go to that party and didn't get any more texts. Fast forward to October in the following school year. I was a senior and busy as hell. One evening, I got a text from an unknown number. "Is this John Morgan?" So I played dumb. I pretended like I wasn't freaking out, that after many months, this person was contacting me again, and I still hadn't figured out who it was. These questions were instantly more personal and really weirded me out. Don't ruin the fun. Not knowing who I am is part of the mystery. "I won't tell you who I am. Not now. Too much to lose." They'd say stuff like that. I'm pretty tired of this game, and I was trying to work. But still, I do want to see if I can pick out any more details, so I'm doing the bare minimum to keep this going. This is December, the end of the semester. They proceeded to call me multiple times. I denied every call, but they kept coming. I think there were 14 calls that night. I turned my phone off. The following week I was in the class I was a TA for. Students were presenting their final work on the projector, and I had queued multiple tabs on the projection computer. 2 different students had work on Google Drive. When the second student logged into their account, they didn't open a private window, so it logged out the first student. I saw this happen, but the first student wasn't in the room, so when she came back I asked her to log in again. We were both standing in the projection booth. She was at one end of the computer, and I was messing with the sound system on the other side, but I happened to turn and look at the projector screen when she was logging into Google. This hit me like a ton of bricks. The username she logged in with was the same username as the TextNow account that had been sending me photos. I quickly turned away and pretended to be busy with something until she finished opening her work. I thanked her, and she left the booth without realizing her mistake. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was going crazy for the rest of the class. After almost a year, I knew who it was. She finally slipped up, and honestly, I was much more scared now than I had ever been. This person had a history of being pretty creepy around my friends. Although she had never personally interacted with me outside of class, all my friends had strange experiences. I made a meeting with a counselor who seemed to really care and offered to look into it. A couple of weeks later, they emailed me saying that this student is going abroad next semester, so we're not going to do anything. I insisted that at least something temporary should be put into place. They didn't do anything, but what did I expect? This school is pretty notorious for not giving a damn about these kinds of things. I didn't run into her again, and she hasn't texted me. So for the time being, that is where the story ends. I met a guy while hiking once. We talked for a little while. One thing I noticed is that when we first spoke, he talked with a slight British accent. It went back to normal American accent after we chatted for a while. Anyway, we found each other interesting and exchanged Facebook info. After a few days of talking online, we decided to meet up at a library. Everything seemed fine, and I saw no red flags. He was nice, and the only thing I began to notice was his eccentric way of talking. He talked like an old-school philosopher, where you asked him a question and he would respond with a question. It got kind of annoying, but I brushed it off as just being silly. I went to his house after the first date. I met his mom. She was sweet, but was a chain smoker, so I couldn't chat with her for longer. I also noticed that there were at least 20 cats in their house. I'm not kidding. I went to his room, and after a little while of talking, he stood up and soliloquized. "Okay, so your bed is going here, and my bed is going to be arranged there." I was like, "What? Come again?" He said, "You're going to move in with me. I'm trying to think where our bed should go." Dude, I just met you like 2 days ago. What makes you think I'll be moving in with you? He stood there with a straight face and looked at me. He then spoke with a creepy medieval tone. "I desire a queen." So once I had enough of him, he kept messaging me on Facebook non-stop. I, of course, blocked him. That wasn't enough, though. I recall him creating about a dozen Facebook accounts with weird play-on-word names like Miss Terry or Olive You and such. Creepy. He kept sending me messages at all hours of the night, and I kept blocking and reporting each one. I remember one saying he was out to destroy my reputation because I had the gall to leave him. I remember the last message he sent after the dozenth time he decided to stop. It went something like, "You got me pregnant. I can feel our child growing inside of me, in my belly. It is a beautiful thing we have created. I will see you in the next life, forever. I am female." I couldn't have gotten him pregnant. Thank goodness he stopped after that message. I broke up with my abusive ex. I moved into my parents' home with my daughter. We had a lot of snow one night, and when we woke up in the morning, I noticed footprints leading up to my window. Then we noticed that there were footprints leading up to all of the windows. We found Marlboro menthol cigarette butts in the snow and traced the footprints to the township hall that we live across from. My ex stood outside and looked in through all the windows, and we didn't know until the next day. My bed was right next to the window. We invested in new locks and curtains for all the windows. We called the police since I had an order of protection, but since we didn't see him, they couldn't do anything. I worked in an ER as a nurse, and twice he came in as a patient. There was never anything actually wrong with him, so we all suspected that he did it as a way to scare me. I never had to be his nurse. Once again, there was no way to prove that it was intentional. Somebody wrote slurs in the dirt on my car multiple times. One time I noticed it in the parking lot of the local grocery store, so I'm unsure of when it was written. But it creeps me out to know he might have been in the store watching me. He just stopped eventually, as far as I know. He got a girl pregnant, and, from what I heard, he left the state to avoid being a father. Our daughter and I are safe now. We have a security system, a dog that barks like a madman any time somebody strange is in the yard, and my SO has assured me that he will do anything to protect us. I still recently received some messages from his mom and sister. They told me that I'm a terrible mom, and that it's all my fault that they can't see my daughter when in reality they have never tried. They also told me that I'm a liar and that my ex never abused me or stalked me. I know the truth, though. I used to work at a pub that was 2 miles from my house. My shift ended at about 11 p.m. one night. I stayed there for a couple of drinks, then started walking home. Now, this had been an exceptional night for me, tip-wise, and I had close to $400 in cash on me at the time. Between the pub and my house was exactly one street light about a quarter mile from the pub. The rest of the walk was in complete darkness. This was a dark night, too. It was close to the new moon and cloudy to boot, so it was almost pitch black. Now, I live out in the boonies, so there isn't even much light pollution to help out. Not long after I leave the pub, a car slowly drives by me. About a quarter mile down the road, the car slows to a stop, and it just sits there. I stop walking and watch the car. It sits for a few minutes, then slowly drives away. A couple of minutes later, the same car comes slowly driving back by me in the opposite lane. It gets by me, drives a bit down the road and slows to a stop again. Then it does a U-turn and starts creeping back down the road towards me with the lights off. At this point, I'm getting terrified. I don't have a cell phone at the time, and there's no one around to see what's going on. The car is between me and the pub, so I can't get back to safety there. My house is still about 1.5 miles away. No way I can quickly escape there. I quickly run off the road into the woods and duck down behind a bush. I watch for the car, but it's too dark to see it with the lights off and bushes and trees between me and the road. I sit there for about 10 minutes, but don't see or hear anything. I'm about to make my way back to the road when I hear car doors closing. Now I'm really panicking. It feels like my chest is about to explode. The hairs on the back of my neck is standing up. I keep imagining someone sneaking up behind me. I stay hidden and hope to God whoever it is doesn't find me. I don't know how long I stay there, but I eventually hear car doors again, then cars passing by. I give it a couple of minutes, then ease back to the road. When I see it's clear, I haul ass back to the pub and let my boss know what happened. He said then and there that I'm never to walk home at night again. Either him, his brother, or his mom will give me a lift home. When the other servers and the kitchen staff hear what happened, they all say the same thing. Never been that terrified before. I worked at a convenience store. I was 17 when this all happened. There was this one woman who from afar seemed normal, but up close you'll notice something was a bit off. Her makeup was a bit weird. She would wear bright red lipstick, sometimes yellow or bright pink, and always a bit messy. She always wore the same thing and walked around like she was slightly confused. I remember the first time she entered the store. She bought a 30-cent pack of gum with a $10 bill. As I was giving her change, she stared at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. She wasn't blinking. She complimented me. "You're so pretty and beautiful. I want to be like you," with an eerie grin. I replied, "Thanks. Here is your change." Then she said, "Did you know I have $1 million? I'm also going to marry Ryan Seacrest, and we're going to live on a big house on the moon. I would tell you where I hid my $1 million, but I have the power to not tell you." She also said many more wacky things similar to this. I figured back then that she meant no harm. She began frequenting the store much more. She would enter with a silent smile, walk round the store without breaking eye contact, and leave in silence. She usually went in just to stare. I told my friends about her, and they agreed she was creepy, so I started carrying around pepper spray just in case. Then she began to actively stalk. I would be walking my dog and she'd be staring at me from behind a car. I would be sitting on my balcony and she'd shout, "Hey, you look so pretty today." Sometimes I would be walking down a store aisle and she would be behind a rack, giggling and whispering to herself. I'd turn around and she'd run away. There were also a few other places where she ran into me, which I don't think were just coincidence. Why the hell was she stalking me? The final straw was when she broke into my house a few days later, and I have webcam footage of this. I was ready to take a shower one night when I heard the front door open from all the way in my room. I must have forgotten locking the door. Then I heard a familiar voice say, "Oh, so this is where he lives." I freaked the hell out. I turned my laptop webcam on for evidence in case anything went down. I pointed the camera to the living room through my open bedroom door. I was panicking. I asked loudly, "What are you doing here?" Then she said, "I wanted to see if you were in here. Do you have a phone I could borrow?" I demanded that she go and use a payphone outside. She turns around, and I stand there watching her as she leaves. I thought she was gone, but I heard some rustling by my door a minute later. I ran over and saw her stuffing some of my family's dirty laundry into her shirt. I shouted, "Leave that alone! That is not yours!" She dumped the clothes out quickly and ran away. I called the police on her, and she never stalked me again. This story never ceases to give me goosebumps. During my sophomore year of high school, my girlfriend and I were headed to the school dance. We lived in a small Texas town. For reference, my graduating class was 120. I was 15 at the time, so I was still not driving. She picked me up, and we got dinner. The meal went by faster than we expected, so we had about an hour to kill. We were driving on the back roads that were near her house, and she told me she had found the perfect makeout spot. So, of course, my hormonal brain didn't think about just how illegal or dangerous it was to trespass in the middle of nowhere. We pulled into a driveway, or what used to be one. The road was covered with gravel for about 40 feet. The dirt road was extremely overgrown with grass, and it appeared to have not been used in many years. There was a field to the left of us and a densely wooded area to the right. 3 large gravel piles were between us and the woods. When she pulled in, she pulled the car around to face the exit. It was such a trivial thing, yet it made all the difference. There was no one around, and the mood was set. She shut the car off, and we hopped into the back seat, quickly getting down to business. About an hour goes by, and we're about ready to hit the road. While we're getting dressed, she looks at me and says that she really has to pee. At this point, my hormones are back under control, and I'm slowly realizing just how sketchy this place is. It's pitch black, the car is off, and all of our doors are unlocked. Does she mean right now? We're in the middle of nowhere, and I don't think it's a good idea. She was a stubborn girl, which might have had something to do with why we're not together anymore. I see her reaching for the door handle. I've had a few cinematic moments in my life, but the way that she reached for the door is something I'll never forget. Her hand moved so slowly, as if she was waiting for something to happen. Just as her fingertips touched the handle, a crisp knocking noise comes from the back of the car. It was most certainly the sound of knuckles tapping against the top of the trunk. Keep in mind that there are no trees or anything that could have been making this noise on the car. It was a perfect rhythm of knuckles on metal for about 10 seconds. My girlfriend and I sat dead still, holding on to each other, neither of us even breathing. After the longest 10 seconds of my life, the knocking stops. I attempted to look out the window to see if I could see anyone or anything, but I could hardly even see my girlfriend's face right in front of mine. It was dead silent. We didn't even hear any footsteps approaching us in the first place. "What in the world was that?" she asked me. "I don't know, just start the car," I said. My hands were trembling, and I could hear the fear in my own voice. "Babe, please start the car," I asked one more time. "I can't move," she replied. The second she was quiet, the knocking started again. It was the same rhythmic beating that I can still remember perfectly. I had enough. In the course of the next 3 seconds, I was able to jump in the front seat, start the car, lock the doors, turn on the headlights, and put my seatbelt. I'm amazed that I was still able to think of road safety at that moment. I floored that Toyota Corolla like I was a professional NASCAR driver. I hit about 50 on the turnout of that driveway, spewing gravel on whatever was behind me. I drove like a madman for about 2 miles down the road and stopped at an electric plant down the road. My girlfriend got out to use the bathroom, and I sat in the front seat, my whole body still shaking. I got dressed and we drove the rest of the way in silence. That was the first time I had driven a car outside of a parking lot. Once we got to the dance, we just sat in the corner. I have no idea what we even said to each other about it. I just knew that I was never going back to that place, or so I thought. Near the end of the dance, one of my best friends came up to me, and I explained to him what had happened. "We've got to go back," he said. I couldn't believe my ears. This guy wants to go check it out. The next day, around noon, he picked me up, and we went back to the spot. If he didn't believe me the night before, he definitely did now. I got a good look at the spot, just as I remembered it the night before. Now I could definitely see how secluded it really was. There were no houses or buildings within sight of this place. The driveway was not there anymore. I walked up to where the tire marks were from the night before, still fresh in the gravel. I grimaced as I noticed boot prints leading up to the back of the marks. 2 prints, side by side, right behind the back left tire. The prints came from and returned to the overgrown brush. My friend could tell I was pretty uncomfortable, so we decided to head out. A couple of months went by. and me and my girlfriend broke up over unrelated matters. We attend different colleges now, but sometimes she will come and visit some high school friends who attend my school. I saw her last semester. We caught up for a while, just about life and all that good stuff. During a lull in the conversation, I asked her, "Do you ever think about that time?" She put her hand up, her smile gone from her face. "I don't think about it, ever. And I don't want to." And that was the end of that. I'm glad that you're here with us today. Please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy a good scare. As always, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.